All right. Well, we'll get started here now. This morning we're going to talk about freedom in chains, an idea of contentment, and we're also going to be talking about scour analysis and morphological adjustments to channels and how we can adjust for scour analysis related to a change in channel. So, all right, we're going to get started with a quick prayer, and then we'll move on to our talk this morning. Dear God, thank you very much for this time together as a group. Help us to be truly thankful for the opportunities, experiences, and relationships we have, and help us to be able to find ways to be kind and thoughtful towards others this week. We're thankful for what you've given us, and we're excited about what the future holds. Amen. All right. All right, so we're continuing on with the idea of our 4 C's that we started with before. And the third C was contentment. So we'll be talking today about contentment. So we already talked about comparison, we talked about competition, and then today will be contentment. So contentment, as I defined before from the kids' definition online for kids, contentment is freedom from worry or restlessness. That's interesting. Can everybody hear me okay still?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Said I signed out for some reason, so I don't know what happened there. But it's a state of being mentally or emotionally satisfied with the things as they are. Contentment is natural wealth as defined by Socrates. Luxury is artificial poverty. I like that quote. Jesus said, "Therefore, I tell you the truth, do not worry about life, what you will eat, what you will drink, or about the body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes?" And Jesus said that at the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to talk about contentment from Paul's letter to the Philippians, where he had said, "I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in every situation, whether well-fed, hungry, whether living in plenty or want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength." Philippians 4:13. So contentment is, it says, "Are you content in every situation?" as Paul had mentioned, and before had mentioned, well, it kind of depends. A lot of times I'm not. Contentment is more about a feeling. Is not always about this feeling that we have of being content, but it's a decision or a discipline that we have to be content. If we really want to be content in every situation, we don't always feel content in every situation. We have to make a decision to be content. Does it mean I can, does this mean I cannot have desires or goals? If I'm content in something, does that just mean I give up my goals and my desires? And I'd say not at all. And there's a difference between contentment and complacency, which we'll get to next week. So this week, what we'll add on to is the idea of, contentment is this decision that we make. So this is a picture of our 4th child, Stanley, and he looks so content in this picture. He's so calm, and as in his first 2 days of life, we're like, wow, this kid's really calm. He's going to be kind of the calm one of the bunch, Since then, we've realized that he's quite a riot, and he has way too much energy for us. But we think of a baby sometimes when we see this content baby right after it's been fed, right after it's slept well, and it just kind of smiles and giggles. And we think that we should have this feeling of contentment. Well, the baby's content because its stomach's full, because it's still seeing a whole bunch of new things. But what happens when the baby's not seeing new things, when it's not learning something new, when it doesn't have a full stomach? Well, that baby's not going to be content. Sometimes we think that these feelings of contentment that we have should stay with us, and that contentment's more on this feeling. But I would argue that thinking that contentment is a feeling is about like understanding how a baby is content. And anybody that's ever been around a baby knows that it's content for a little while, but it sure doesn't last. So Paul said, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every and any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in plenty or want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. I would say that, in my life, probably one of the greatest skills that I'm learning is this idea of being content in the situations as they come up. And this gives me this idea of being content drives a lot of the other relationships that I have with people and a lot of the other experiences that I have. I would say that contentment drives on the idea of freedom a lot of times, and true freedom is not always familiar to us. I think of the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and they had freedom from their slavery in Egypt, where many people believe they helped build pyramids and other great structures. But as they were going into the wilderness, they had freedom, but it was not what they were familiar with. There were people that said, hey, why don't we just go back to Egypt? At least we were well fed as slaves there. And God desires us to be free, but sometimes we want familiarity instead of our freedoms in life. This idea of freedom becomes so perverted in our culture. We think of freedom as being political. We think of freedom as being related. You see bumper stickers that say freedom's not free, and then they'll have a picture of a flag, or they'll have a picture of a military person. And I would say freedom's not free either, but the freedom that we have is so different than the freedom that the world seems to know, and the perversion of that. So freedom, Paul talks to us in Philippians, and he talks to the church. Paul was in prison at the time. He was in chains, and he was teaching the church how to be free. I think that's unique, that we think of the fact that, if we're in prisons, if we're in chains, if we're not allowed to meet as a group, if somebody's persecuting us, that we can't be free. Well, maybe that's the time that we truly are free. Nelson Mandela said, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedoms of others. And when we talk about free, there's three big freedoms that Paul talked to in the early part of Philippians. The freedom from fear. And he had said in there, it does not matter if I live or die. If I live, then I'll be with you longer. If I die, then I'll die in gain, because I'll be with Christ earlier. And it's not that he wanted to die. It's just this idea of freedom, saying death has no power over me. Whether I live or die doesn't make a bit of a difference, but I can be thankful in this situation. And then the other one he talked about was a freedom from flesh. And a lot of times with freedom from flesh, we think of this as our fleshly desires or the things we're addicted to, but it's also related to our feelings, the freedom from our feelings, our moodiness that we have. And when we are feeling moody, can we have freedom from that and not have to live in that moodiness? I think of my daughter, Ida, and she'll show up and she'll say, I just want to be angry today. I'm just not feeling good. I want to feel angry. I'm just angry. And part of our freedom is being free from these moodiness. And then the final freedom he talks about is the freedom from pride. Freedom from pride is we don't have to define who we are, because we already know who we are. We already know that we're a loved child of God. So it doesn't matter what other people think of us. We don't have to worry about the opinions of others or the opinions of ourselves, because we know who we are. Our pride can enchain and enslave us. I always think it's interesting when we have countries that have a lot of pride about their freedom, because it's like, is it even possible to have pride about freedom? Isn't freedom itself is the idea of not having to define yourself by something of this world? I borrowed these ideas. I like them. They're from a pastor named Stephen Furtick out of Elevations Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. And these were his 10 his contentments or in other words, 10 ideas to help keep you content, because contentment. And the first one was remember to rejoice. And the psalm says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. If you think of this idea of rejoice, if you think of yourself as a director in the story of your life, you always have a chance on what you include in the picture or the movie that you're showing at the time. You don't have to include the memories of the bad thoughts. You can include the memories of the things that you could rejoice in. Or you can include the memories of, hey, that was a bad thing that happened, but this is a way I could find something to rejoice in. You know, we have a choice on what it is that we elevate in our memories, what it is that we remember, and that we can find rejoice and that we can rejoice in. The second one was the idea of refusing to resent things. I've spent times in my life where I've resented somebody or resented something, and it's always imprisoned me. I've never felt content because I was always trying to prove myself as being right or prove my situation as being right, when sometimes this resentment that I have was what was empowering me at the time. I was spending more time in my resentment than other times. I remember one of my former bosses at a company I used to work for. I developed quite a resentment for that person, but I imprisoned myself over that resentment. It didn't really matter to that person. That person probably didn't care much about what I thought about him, but I had spent time because I didn't refuse to resent that person. Appreciate all the seasons in our life. You know, to every time in our life, there's a season. We have these different seasons in our lives. There's, you know, I'm not the same person that I was when I was early teenager. I'm not the same person I was as I was 20 years old. I have a different season in my life. There's aspects of my life that are the same, and there's a common thread through my life, but I have different seasons. Sometimes, if you think in sports, you know, sometimes, I can think of, grew up a Philadelphia Phillies fan, and I can think of times that they had rebuilding years in sports that you're like, hey, this is just going to be an awful year, you know, or if you're a Seahawks fan, you know, after Steve Largent left, had a whole bunch of rebuilding years until you ended up having Wilson come later, you know, type of things. You just had a whole bunch of these rebuilding years. And sometimes we have rebuilding seasons in our lives. We have times that, you know, we might be lonely for a season, but it's important for us to remember that these are seasons in our lives, and we can find ways to rejoice through these seasons, even though they seem tough. We can use goals and desires for stuff to make us think of future contentment, but a lot of times we say, hey, I have this goal to get maybe I want a new Suburban, or maybe I want a new baseball glove, and this is my goal, and once I get that, I'll be content, and I have this future idea of contentment. But the truth is that these goals and desires don't make us content. Once we get that new Suburban, we're like, hey, this transmission's broke just like the old one did. This isn't any better than the last one. I'm no more content than I was before. I just have another thing to worry about. The number 4 thing is keep a secret stash in our lives. So when it comes to being content, what is it that can help me get contentment? Now, for me, I'm ashamed to say that friends of mine and people that used to work for me used to keep a stash of Dr. Pepper with them when they worked with me. So if you were out in the field, and Josh Allen's laughing right now, if you were out in the field, I remember Dave Godley, who used to work for me, whenever they messed up something, they would bring me a Dr. Pepper before they told me they messed up something, whether they messed up the survey data, or whether they ran over a total station with a truck. They would bring me a Dr. Pepper and be like, hey, Dave, and give me the Dr. Pepper, and then I'd be okay to answer the question, not get near as angry at them. But I think of this as keeping a secret stash. What is it that we can keep in our lives for contentment? I think of this as encouraging words, whether these are quotes that you have from meaningful people that you've worked with, whether they're words that people have given you in letters, whether they're verses from the Bible, whether they're verses from another meaningful book, whether they're songs that you can sing. What is it that you can remember in your mind when you feel lonely? What is it that you can remember in your mind when life has given you something that you just don't feel good about, that you feel imprisoned about? What is it that you can keep as your secret stash to give you some sort of comfort and encouragement in these times? And don't confuse the supply with the source. When we have something that's amazing that comes in our life that we've been blessed with, a lot of times we think of this and say, hey, I've been blessed with money, and it's great to have this money. But don't forget about, that's just the supply that you have at the time. That's not the source of where it comes from. The source of all of our blessings, very rarely come from us. I've never known of somebody that's truly a self-made man. I mean, even in thinking of, things of this iconic idea of a self-made man, you read about things related to John Wayne and other people, that this icon of a macho self-made man, and the real person was anything but self-made. We have a source of blessings in our lives from others, from God, from relationships, experiences, and these are all blessings, and it's something that we're supplied with, but they're not the source of it. The source comes from others and from God. Don't downplay disappointment as it shows up. I think of this related to the Monty Python skit, In Search of the Holy Grail. And you have one of the knights that says neat that comes up, and they end up cutting off his arm, and then they cut off another arm, and they cut off his legs. And he goes, it's merely a flesh wound. Come back here, I'll bite off your kneecaps. And a lot of times in life, we're like, hey, I got I received cancer, but it's not a really big deal. Cancer is no big deal, so no big problem. Oh yeah, I got my arm cut off, but I didn't really like that arm anyways. In contentment, we think that sometimes contentment is downplaying disappointments. That's not the case at all. It's just believing that there's a plan and purpose for things, even when the outcome's not what we expected, and still being content and saying, hey, something good can come out of this. The God that I serve is bigger than this, or my situation that comes out of this can still see something good come out of this, even though it's not what I had hoped for. But downplaying disappointments just makes people think you're crazy, and it doesn't help you be empathetic with others. We have to recognize when we see blessings. I'm reminded of this constantly with my kids on pretty much any given day. The kids will drive me nuts with their new games that they're playing, and they come up to me and they want attention. And I find myself getting angry and frustrated because I have other things I think I need to go do, but yet sometimes I just need to recognize the blessings that I have in my life. That doesn't mean I don't try to train the kids to be respectful and honor others, but it means that I can recognize the blessings even when it seems overwhelming at times. And then release our feelings. Releasing our feelings means that sometimes we feel happy, sometimes we feel angry, sometimes we feel frustrated or fearful, but don't allow those feelings to control our contentment. Don't let them imprison us. So don't let our anger or frustration make us be imprisoned, but allow our feelings to be released at times. So say, yes, I feel angry, but I can still see a blessing in this. Number 9 is hard for me, and it's been hard for me for a while, is receive from others. Sometimes I'm just way too proud to say that I need something or that I even want something. I feel as if, well, it's okay for me to help other people, but I don't want other people to have to help me. I don't want to put them out, if you will. I want them to be in a situation where, I've helped them, but they didn't have to help me. Sometimes we need to receive from others. If we don't receive from others, we'll never get what we truly need in life, which is probably going to be related to freedom, relationships, experiences. But we have to receive from others. And a lot of times I've spent time in my life where I've said things like, well, if that person just told me they needed something, I'd help them out. I don't know why they won't let me help them. And then I look back at myself and realize that, well, a lot of times I'm too proud to ask people for help and say, hey, I really need help with managing this project. I really need help with this aspect of this design. Instead of, allowing other people to help, sometimes I say, okay, I can help others, but I just, I don't need them to help me. And then the final one is just remain where you are. if you're in a place where you're dependent on God, if you're in a place where you're dependent on something else in life that gives you strength, remain there at times and go back to that place of rest and peace. Don't worry about the fact that, okay, well, I need to keep on moving to a different situation. I got to keep on moving forward. Sometimes it's important for us just to be still and remain where we're at for contentment. Don't worry about, okay, where's the next step? What's the next thing I'm going to do? Just be still and rest sometimes. So the question that I would ask you today is, in contentment, are you free? I mean, are you really truly free? Not free as the political system tells us we're free, not free as, you know, a marriage license may tell us that we're free, but are we truly free? And what I would say is, if you say, what do you even mean by free? I would argue that you're probably not free. So think about this week. Are you free? And if you say, I don't even know what you mean by free, then try to figure out what it means to be free. A book that I'll recommend to you is a book written by an author called Brennan Manning called The Ragamuffin Gospel. And Brennan, one of his quotes said, real freedom is freedom from the opinions of others, above all, freedom from the opinions about yourself. And sometimes we chain ourselves up more than anybody else in this life would ever think to chain us up. Remember, it's not this story we have, this life we have, it's not really about us, but it's about God. God knows what we need. God knows, and he has what we need. So Jesus said, when the Jews said to the Jews who believed in him, if you continue to accept and obey my teaching, you are really my followers. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Contentment is about knowing who you are and being free in that situation. And that gives us power to be able to be at peace and rest, even when the situations are horrible. I would say that the chains in our life, we can find contentment while we're in chains, while we're enslaved by this world, because there's actually power for those chains that the world thinks they have on us that aren't really imprisoning us at all. Some of the recent things, you hear a lot of crazy right now on Facebook, and I don't have a Facebook account, but we have a lot of people we love dearly that we hear things, and people are able to jump onto conspiracies. I heard somebody say this week that, you know, the term conspiracy theory is old and outdated, and we should do away with the term because people are thinking of all these sins of why, you know, bad things are happening in this world. And what I would say is contentment is saying, you know, yes, maybe something bad's happened. Maybe somebody's trying to do something bad for me. Maybe this is all a hoax, or maybe it's not a hoax, but I can still be content. I can still live with freedom because I don't get my freedom from this world. I don't get my freedom from the doctors. I don't get my freedom from the politicians. I don't get the freedom from anything other than the creator of the universe who has given me freedom. So I'm going to open up for a couple of thoughts if anybody has any, and then we'll move on to scour assessment and pipeline protection.